Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Coming up, Chinese scholar warns of resurgence of Japanese militarism at Shangri-La Dialogue. China signs a new regulation to advance high-quality outbound investments. The UN Security Council is going to convene emergency session over Israel's military incursion into Lebanon. China's Innovent strikes a huge cancer drug deal with Pfizer amid China biotech boom. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on our previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. First up, a scholar from the Chinese delegation has warned against attempts to revive Japanese militarism at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. Meng Xiangqing, a professor from the National Defense University of China, questioned whether Japan is qualified to discuss international defense cooperation before fully reckoning with its wartime past. Meng noted that this year marks the 80th anniversary of the opening of the Tokyo trial, adding that the Tokyo trial laid an important legal foundation for the post-war international order. He said today there are still forces attempting to challenge the verdicts of the Tokyo trial with an aim to rewrite the history of Japanese wartime aggression. Tensions between China and Japan have been high since Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi made a provocative remark regarding the Taiwan question in November last year. Takaichi's administration is also actively pushing for revisions to Japan's post-war pacifist constitution to allow for a more aggressive military posture. So for more on this, joining us now on the line is Dr. Rong Ying, Chair Professor at the School of International Studies, Sichuan University. So thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Rong Ying. First of all, why do you think the Chinese delegation found it necessary to sound alarm about the resurgence of Japanese militarism on this very occasion?
Well, I think as far as the Chinese delegation are concerned, I think raising the issue or highlight risk and the danger of the resurgence of Japanese militarism is not only necessary but a must. First and foremost, of course, China as a victim of Japan's wartime militarism has all the reason to be concerned about the developments. Particularly, I think the latest accelerated development of Japan's move towards militarization, raising the danger of the revival of new military. And secondly, I think this is the Shangri-La Dialogue, is kind of a dialogue forum for discussions about security issues, security challenges. The fact that Japan has recently accelerated, quickened the pace for militarization definitely deserve a serious discussions, in particular, I think, the consequences and the effects of that. And last but not least, I think this year marks the 80th anniversary of the Tokyo Military Tribunal, which I think in legal terms, clear and explicitly sort of delivered a verdict about the crime committed by Japan's militarism, and that the international justice and the international order should be upheld, given the fact that this part of the world, despite the sort of continued peace and stability that has been enjoyed in the past decades, are facing increasingly dangerous challenges ahead. So calling upon the international community, in particular, I think the regional countries, to be vigilant, to take effective measures to ensure that Japan will continue to follow the road to peace, is not only legitimate, rightful, and I think necessary.
Shinjiro Koizumi, Japan's defense minister, has rejected suggestions that Japan is reviving militarism. He used his address at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore to state that Tokyo opposes unilateral changes to the status quo by force or by coercion, which is clearly a reference to China's actions in the East China Sea, the South China Sea, etc., or the Taiwan question. How do you look at his comment here?
Well, I think there's a saying in Chinese, I guess it is also known to the audience of other countries, that catch thief. The fact that Japan, by capitalizing the complexity or complicated security, involving security situations to pursue its sort of a security agenda, militarization, changing the constitution, push for the revision of the pacifist constitution, and also, I think, break free the international arrangement, particularly on the question of its defense posture, is a reality. It not only, I think, has been raised concerns by the international community, regional countries, and very much opposed by Japanese people. Look at the protests, look at the demonstrations, look at those Japanese that have been launched their protest whenever there's a new initiative, new moves along this line. I think Koizumi also made a point by highlighting the so-called track record, Japan's record in the post-World War history, arguing that reinforces its the road for Japan, which is exactly the reason why we have to be very vigilant and really have to ensure that Japan will not deviate from the post-record or World War path of development. And we know that the right-wing forces have always tried to push for their agenda for militarization by denying, whitewash its wartime atrocities, histories, aggressions against the Japanese neighbors and regional country. That always try to find an excuse not only to break free the constraints by its pacifist constitution, but also to pursue, I think, military capabilities, which has been denied, as a matter of fact, renounced by Japanese constitution. So I think the Koizumi's remarks only reinforce the need for, I think, international community to be more vigilant and reinforce the fact that without sort of following right path, Japan could make mistakes again, which, as the history shows, causing numerous destructions and problems, not only to itself, but also, I think, the region as a whole. So this is why I think China has always joined to call upon, I think, danger and the risk of Japanese militarization and the danger of new militarism in Japan.
The Japanese defense minister also suggested that it is strange that Japan has neither nuclear weapons nor strategic bombers, yet it is labeled as new militarism. How would you respond to his argument or his logic here?
Well, I think it's the logic of Koizumi's does not hold water at all. I think having a kind of defense capability is not the factor that constitutes the militarism. And after all, I think there are more than several countries in the world that possess nuclear weapons or strategic sort of facilities. But that does not necessarily constitute militarism. The militarism here we are referring to, or in this context, is kind of ideology, Japanese, and back in 1930s, which has misguided or guided Japan to pursue military expansion, to launch, to support its external aggressions. And related to that, there are other sort of political, social, and even in terms of intelligence institutions that help Japan to fulfill that purpose. And these sort of arrangements, these constraints they are now, if one follows the latest development, particularly I think the past 6 months, I've seen they all have been challenged or undermined by the Japanese right-wing forces represented by Koizumi and Koizumi certainly, and by Takaichis and others. So that is why I think arguing that possessing of nuclear weapons and strategic sort of deterrence, not a good one. And after all, I think the NPTs and UN system that Japan is also part of that as recognized 5 nuclear weapon state. And of course, by having that nuclear capability, it's also very much hold a responsibility to ensure the non-proliferation issues. So I thought this is a very bad argument.
Japan and the Philippines has decided to launch maritime boundary delimitation talks. Why do you think, from China's perspective, this move is illegal and represents serious infringement upon China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests?
The maritime boundary delimitation talks, I mean, the areas or the seas that are being touched upon, covered by the Japanese and the Philippines talks, has overlapping or has implications for China's territorial integrity and maritime rights. So, according to the international laws and practice, without proper notification and consultations with a third party, in this case China, I think it is inappropriate, at least, and illegal for Japan and the Philippines to launch such kind of talks, which I think China argues rightly that it is a kind of infringe upon China's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and maritime rights. And it is definitely China would respond, and China has responded. China will take every possible steps to ensure its territorial integrity, its security, and maritime rights that has been underpinned by international laws, including UNCLOS, should be safeguarded.
What do you think could be the consequences of Japan moving to revise militarism in the name of seeking to play a new role in defense equipment cooperation across the region?
I think the fact that the Japanese defense minister, and in this case, openly and publicly announced that it will continue to pursue defense equipment cooperation, so-called defense equipment cooperation, speaks loudly and clearly its real intention of Japan in breaking free its pacifism to pursue kind of militarism. And as we know that Japan's sort of constitution, the pacifist constitution, renounced that Japan would not use military means to settle its dispute and would not pursue military capabilities. And the consequences, as we have discussed, is of course very serious. It would first and foremost would push for a kind of possible arms races, but most importantly, I think it would raise tensions between Japan and other countries in the region. And that's why I think we have to be really vigilant. We have to really careful. And again, as I said, we have to really ensure Japan would continuously and sincerely take the road of the peaceful development. As, by the way, interestingly, I think Koizumi has not sort of denied.
Thank you very much. Dr. Rong Ying, Chair Professor at the School of International Studies, Sichuan University. Coming up, China signs a new regulation to advance high-quality outbound investments. This is World Today. Stay tuned. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. The State Council of China has signed a new regulation on outbound investment that will take effect on July the 1st. The regulation aims to advance high-quality outbound investments, protect investor rights and interests, and safeguard national sovereignty, security, and development interests. The regulation is also encouraging high-standard opening up, Belt and Road cooperation, stronger risk controls, and better services for Chinese corporations investing abroad. So for more, joining us now on the line is Dr. Yao Shujie, Chang Kong Professor of Economics with Chongqing University. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor.
Hello, welcome.
So this is a 34-article regulation. Why do you think it is looking to bar indirect transfers of goods, technologies, services, or related data through cross-border deployment of technical personnel, consulting services, training programs, and so on?
Yes, China has become the foreign direct investor getting more and more important just for over 20 years. Actually, the direct foreign investment started in large quantity from 2004. And today, China become one of the major investors in the global economy. In some years, China is number one or number two of foreign investors. And more Chinese capital are invested in a variety of projects in countries across the globe. This means that as the scale of investment from China getting bigger and bigger, the risk is becoming ever more increasing. So the government is putting the regulation at the right time at this point of time because there are a number of issues that need to be addressed. The first issue to me is the most important issue is that China should have an open and transparent system of foreign investors, make sure that investing in another country is for business expansion, for the benefit of the Chinese economy and society, rather than for some individual who either directly or indirectly, taking excessive risk for their own company, for individual, and also for the country. So this is a very responsible regulation at this point. The secondly is that Chinese capital are getting bigger and bigger and more welcome in different countries. And the geopolitical system in the world is very uncertain and is full of risk and uncertainty. Different countries have different law and regulation and have different certainty in terms of absorbing foreign capitals. And political, economy, and social stability would also affect the investment risk of Chinese capital abroad. And certainly, the agents or the market entity who are involved in the investments, they have to be regulated. Otherwise, they could use illegal means or some sort of irregulatory, irrational means to plow capital from China for non-investment purpose, which is a drainage for Chinese wealth and capital. And this is probably the least bottom line that the Chinese central and local authority would not like to see. So by putting together these 34 articles, regulations, it's provide a very clear signals of where you can invest, who can be invest, and where is the risk could be controlled for, anti-access for the concept foreseeable future and risk, and also the destination for different area. For example, like the Belt and Road Initiative, and other area that China wish to invest more money, which have some international regulation and political diplomatic considerations. So I think it is the right time to do this at the moment, and investors, whether they are individual or institution, have to be fully aware of why the Chinese government is doing so at this particular juncture.
Yeah, we understand the regulation also authorizes the Chinese government to impose retaliatory measures, let's put it this way, on foreign entities viewed as undermining China's national interests, including those that suspend certain transactions with Chinese enterprises or adopt some sort of, discrimination or discriminatory measures against the Chinese investors. What is the logic of this authorization?
The logic is very clear. I mean, cross-border investment have to depend on the principle of mutually benefit for both parties, China and investing, countries or company. But if the other side, deliberately impose some sort of unfair, imposition on the Chinese company and also have some technological blockage or some other unfair treatment against the Chinese, individual companies or the national interests, then this kinds of foreign activity would not be allowed. And the Chinese, as a retaliatory or the retrospective actions, is to make sure the Chinese capital shouldn't be supportive of these kinds of activity which are against the Chinese interest. So this logic is very clear. China want to stress out that any bidirectional investment or bidirectional technological cooperation, including commodity and other resources, they have to play on the fair competition and mutually beneficial level playing field, rather than on the one side they have detrimental effect on the Chinese side, and the Chinese would not do anything to allow this to happen. So this concept logic is to make sure that, yes, the door is open, but you have to open on a fairly competitive basis.
Now, some people have cautioned that this regulation could lead to a growing divergence between corporate and state priorities, because they say corporations are just seeking higher returns, higher profits in their overseas operation, while the Chinese government is more focused on keeping, those strategic assets within its regulatory reach. What is your take on this, Professor Yao?
I don't agree with this concept argument. Actually, I would argue the other way around. An individual company, yes, I agree that they have to be, profit making. They have to seek higher return. There's no doubt about it. But if the so-called higher return is at the detriment of the national interest, then it is a different issue. They have to be national interest neutral to pursue this kind of higher return. If this higher return is based on the detrimental of the Chinese national interest, then it is wrong to support this higher return. Another argument is that some company, yes, in the short term, they think they can have higher return, but they forget that the destination of the investment could incur a significant loss, which is beyond the capacity of the enterprises who make the initial, investment, and expect the national government to bail them out once they get bankrupt or once they lost order or a significant part of capital, then it is wrong. So the national regulation is to prevent two things. The first thing is that private enterprises, their investment got to be based on the national interest neutral basis. And secondly, they have to bear the risk that the enterprises could bear themselves without eventually fall out to the country. So I don't think that the argument is supportive of the real reality. I would argue that there's the other way around. Like the government actually would encourage enterprises
Your points well taken. But thank you very much for joining us, Professor Yao Shujie, Changkong Professor of Economics, joining us from Chongqing University. You are listening to World Today. We'll be back.
Welcome. I'm Elaf Elad, economics professor and member of the Data Science and AI Center at New York University, Shanghai. On the World Today program, you can find in-depth and impartial insight, as well as critical commentary on key trends in the Chinese economy, financial technology, business, and blockchain. To prepare for the world tomorrow, join me on World Today.
You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. The United Nations Security Council will convene an emergency session over Israel's military expansion into Lebanon. The move comes as Israel captured the strategic site of Beaufort Castle in southern Lebanon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described this capture as a decisive shift in its offensive against Hezbollah. Lebanon's prime minister has accused Israel of carrying out collective punishment. France, Germany, Britain, and Egypt have all condemned Israel's operation in Lebanon, urging all parties to immediately cease hostilities and return to the ceasefire. For more on this, my colleague Xu Yawen spoke with Dr. Wang Jing, a Middle East expert.
Dr. Wang, Israel has expanded ground operations and captured Beaufort Castle. What strategic objectives does Israel hope to achieve, and how will the latest military operation reshape the landscape along the Israel-Lebanon border?
First of all, I think Israel's goal is very clear. They just want to the largest extent, to reassure their security of the northern area. So that's why they expand further into the deep areas of Lebanon to hope to establish the so-called buffer zone inside Lebanese southern area. But on the other hand, we cannot forget is that with the military activities continue, to some extent it will influence and it will affect the ongoing dialogue between United States and Iran, because from Israeli perspective, they believe that the dialogue between United States and Iran should not happen. They believe that the United States has already made too much concessions again over Iran, and from their perspective, they believe that the ultimate pressure from United States should be continuously going to the side of Iran. So that's why the continuation of conflict inside Lebanon will continue once the dialogue and the negotiation between the United States and Iran faces the opportunities and the possibilities of breakthrough. So that's why we are actually witnessing a very, very critical moment under which that the military tension in southern Lebanon faces the further escalation, and the tension might continue.
The U.S. is reportedly proposing a new framework under which Hezbollah would halt attacks and Israel would refrain from further escalation in Beirut. How realistic is the proposal, and what obstacles, in your view, could prevent both sides from reaching a deal?
I think it's very hard because when we're talking about the new framework, it means that two sides or three sides should accept. Means Hezbollah, of course. Israel, it might be difficult because we have to know that this year, the second half of this year, we're facing the new election inside Israel. So Israel's right wing, very assertive powers will try to dominate the public opinion, and they hope to do something to violate the ongoing negotiation between the United States and Iran. And also the third party we cannot forget is Lebanese government, because actually Lebanese Hezbollah is important, but they are not the legal government. And the third party, the Lebanese government, should be included. So that's why this framework, it means to some extent, is a very important part of the so-called comprehensive peace in the Middle East talk between the United States and Iran. Because from Iran's perspective, the peace, if it could be reached, should not only include the United States and Iran, but also include Israel, Iran, Lebanese, Hezbollah, Yemen Houthi, and other parts of the region. So it should be a very comprehensive one. But let's be frank, I don't think that Israel will accept it. I don't think that Hezbollah, to some extent, would accept it. And I don't think that, to some extent, the Lebanese government would accept it. So that's why I think it's a very tough and difficult proposal. To some extent, might be accepted by some part of the conflicting sides, but I don't think there will be someone accept them once and for all.
Dr. Wang, we have seen that several countries like France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and also Egypt, they have criticized Israel's latest military action. And under the request of France, the UN Security Council will convene an emergency session over Israel's military expansion into Lebanon. So what role can international community and the UN realistically play in preventing a wider regional conflict?
I think the external powers would be very difficult to actually do something to prevent the further war, because we are witnessing the war that launched by Israel, and is motivated from Israeli inside different powers. As we mentioned, on the one hand, as from Israeli perspective, they have a very particular understanding of what is going on in this region and what should be done to prevent the further worsening of its security situation in its northern part. So that's why they are the major one who launched this kind of the war. And also, on the other hand, we cannot forget the pressure that inside Israel now they will have a new election, and this new election will determine who would in power, maybe the next years. So that's why it's very critical for Israel. So that's why I think we are doing something. What the international community to do is to enhance the kind of consensus and just to give new external pressure and public opinion pressure towards Israel. But these things cannot alone determine what will happen next. Israel will do it themselves. Israel will do what they want at their own will. I don't think that Israel will suspend the military actions just because of external pressure.
And then, Dr. Wang, the current confrontation have lasted for a long time. Then how long-term security arrangements can be explored to diffuse tensions fundamentally and avoid repeated clashes on the Israel-Lebanon border?
Well, I think the tension will continue because when the tension erupted, it's just a result of the conflicts of the different understandings of the regional security structure. What should be done, what will happen, and how to respond to the challenges. Different countries have different understandings. From Israeli perspective, for example, they think they should do something much more aggressively, much more assertively to prevent the further so-called worsening of their security surroundings. And from Iran's perspective, they believe they are trying to melt down the divisions with the United States, and also they are trying to melt down the chances of the new war that could harm themselves. And also from the United States perspective, they should not only consider their own interests, but also they have to take the interests and the concerns of other regional allies, such as Saudi, such as the Emirates, such as Qatar, such as maybe Oman, such as Bahrain, and such as Kuwait, and other its regional allies into its own considerations. So that's why their regional policies become much more comprehensive and could have different divisions with Israel. So that's why we're talking about something that's conflicting ideas, conflicting the plans, conflicting outlooks over what should be done. So that's why I think it's very difficult to set up the very fundamental and the comprehensive peace deal that would end every conflict in every corner of the region. I think the tension will rise, the tension will continue, and we are facing much more. We will face much more uncertainties in the future in this region.
So you're suggesting, even though there are agreements, Israel and Lebanon, they're going to talk in Washington, but still the conflict will carry on?
First of all, I don't think there will be agreements. Even there were some agreement, it's just a temporary, we call it truce. It's not a kind of the peace deal. Just as before, if it could be reached between Israel and the Lebanon government, it would means the temporary frozen of the kind of the conflict in southern Lebanon. But on the one hand, it cannot end the distrust and hatred between Israelis and Lebanese Hezbollah. And also on the other hand, it cannot insert and add confidence of Israel over the implementation of the deal, because from Israeli perspective, Lebanese government is too fragile, is too weak. They cannot control and manage or tame, or if we use the term much more properly, the so-called tame the Lebanese Hezbollah, because Lebanese Hezbollah, to some extent, they are independent. They have military wings. They have their own organizations without the control of Lebanese government. So Israel worried about it very strongly. So that's why I think maybe there was some talks between Israel and the Lebanese government in the United States. It's just, for me, it's more like a kind of the political show than the kind of the scenario that could lead to the very successful and fundamental settlement of the crisis in southern Lebanon between Israel and the Lebanese Hezbollah.
That was Middle East expert Dr. Wang Jing speaking with my colleague Xu Yawen. This is World Today. We'll be back. You are listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. U.S. inflation has surged to its highest level in 3 years, driven largely by soaring energy prices amid Middle East conflict. The Federal Reserve's preferred inflation gauge, personal consumption expenditure, rose to 3.8% for April. The release of this particular data came just weeks before the Fed's first policy meeting under its new chair, Kevin Warsh. Investors are now reassessing expectations for interest rates, while consumers are facing higher costs for fuels, food, housing, and utilities. For more on this, my colleague Zhao Yang earlier spoke with Yan Liang, professor of economics with Willamette University.
So, Yan, first of all, how significant is this latest inflation spike? The US PCE rose to 3.8% in April. What does it mean? Is it a temporary energy-driven shock or the beginning of a more sustained inflation cycle?
Well, I think the 3.8% year-to-year increase in the headlines PCE in April is quite significant. So this is accelerated from the 3.5% in March. And when you look at the core PCE, it's still up by 3.3%. So I think that indicates that this is a relatively broad-based inflation. It's not just energy related. I mean, energy definitely is a major driver of this current inflation spike. But when you look at other, for example, in the consumer basket to measure CPI, over 25 to 30% of the items have gone up in price by more than 5%. So the energy cost has already filtered through to the more downstream, including, some of the service sector. And so I think that, when you look at transportation, when you look at housing, when you look at food distribution, travel, a lot of these are also seeing, higher prices, partly due to the energy price, but part of it also, I think, due to labor cost and others. And I think this kinds of energy-related cost increase has just very much broad effect on many other items in the economy. Not to mention, I think there's also a very strong increase in demand in terms of capital investments in computer software, tech, and AI infrastructure. So that strong demand also drive up inflation. And finally, trade tariffs, there has been some delay effect that also drives some of the core good price higher. So I think that, in other words, I think this energy cost increase is being felt in the broader economy, and it's also compounded by other policies and other trend of the economy. So I think that this is not going to be just a short-term energy-induced inflation, but it could be a more sustained inflation cycle unfolding.
And the petrol prices jumped to 5.5% last month. What does it mean for the U.S. consumers? Do you think people are preparing for the long run?
Yes. So I think one of the things that I think that it's clear is that, as I mentioned earlier, this does not just show up as a price increase in just the energy, for example, the gas pump, but you're also seeing food items, travel, and many other service items also increase in prices. Transportation service has gone up by 4.3%, hospital service has gone up by 5.5%, shelter has gone up by 3.3%, and so on and so forth. So it seems that the middle class and lower income families are bearing the major brunt because all of these are raising their cost of living. So I think eventually consumers would have to resort to higher debt, borrowing to cover the higher living cost, or they would have to reduce some of their more discretionary spending to pay for, some of the necessities such as energy. And I would also think that, people are expecting that, as soon as the Middle East conflict is ended, then things would immediately be better. But I think that is quite unreasonable or unrealistic expectation, because it would take at least months, if not years, for the kinds of Strait of Hormuz to be reopened to even return to normal, if there's ever a normal to be returned to, because it takes time to clear the waterway, to really establish the confidence of passing through the strait, to reduce the insurance premium of the ships that transit through the strait. And also some of the energy facilities are being impaired. So it would also take time to either turn them on or to repair them. And finally, I think we're also seeing a lot of the shifts, for example, diversifying energies, not just from the Middle East, but from other parts of the world, as well as supply chain reshuffling. Again, there is a nearshoring or diversification, or trying to avoid concentrating, supplies from certain areas. So all of this would add more to costs and reduce efficiency. So I think that this longer term impact on the global inflationary pressure is not going to be end immediately, even after the war has ended.
And the Federal Reserve is entering its first meeting under Chairman Kevin Warsh. So what kind of policy direction should market expect? If inflation remains elevated because of the geopolitical tensions, does the Federal Reserve have any effective tools to respond to that?
Well, I think despite the political pressure from President Trump to lower rates, I think Kevin Warsh would still have a hard time to justify a rate cut. I think in the immediate term or near term, they're most likely to be a rate hold. In other words, there won't be any immediate cuts because of the elevated inflationary pressure. And the Fed needs to, in a way, help to stabilize the inflation expectation. So I think Kevin Warsh cannot rush to make cuts. And even though he has made the sort of a certain pivot, for example, he's advocating for alternative gauge of inflation instead of looking at the traditional, core PCA. He has been asking to look at the so-called trimmed mean inflation, which is going to be likely to be lower than the core CPI, because this is basically trying to filter through those extreme one-off price anomalies caused by temporary geopolitical shocks. So I think he would propose to look at different measures and, in a way, sort of reduce the kinds of inflation indication. But that said, I still think that it would be very difficult at this time, given the high inflation and the higher expected inflation, that he would have enough justification to make cuts. In addition to that, I think he's probably also have different ways of conducting monetary policy. For example, he has been talking about aggressively shrinking the Federal Reserve's balance sheets right now at $6.7 trillion. So trimming those balance sheets would mean that there might be a lower sort of level of liquidity, especially when it comes to affecting the long-term rates. So that, again, it's not going to be conducive when it comes to providing abundant liquidity and trying to reduce the interest rates. And finally, he has also been talking about not having the so-called forward guidance. He repeatedly criticized the Fed's practice of the so-called forward guidance. So what he wants to do is to have more sort of long-term guidance of the Fed instead of looking at the short-term and the updated sort of data, and to guide the markets towards certain policy outcome. So I think all of this would show there's certain, in terms of sort of pivot when it comes to monetary policy stance. But that said, I think the short-term policy hold, the rate holds, I think is most likely to happen. And depending on how this Middle East conflict is going to end and how fast things could return to quote unquote normal, that would really determine what the next step the Fed is going to take.
And currently, there is a lot of discussions on the U.S. economy, where it is heading next. So, Yan, do you think U.S. economy is facing more stagflation risks?
Well, I definitely think that risk it's there, especially when you look at the three pillars in terms of the sort of stagflation. signs. First of all, is we just talked about the resurgent and also sticky inflation. So the headline CPI surged to 3.8% in April. So this is a major acceleration, and that is definitely pushed the Fed's target of 2% further away. And second, stagnation of economic growth. So after the strong growth in the previous quarters, now the GDP has slowed down dramatically to an annualized rate of just 0.5%. So, for example, Moody's characterized the current environment as an economy that is not just soft, but is struggling in their language. And finally, when you look at the labor market, the unemployment rate right now has ticked up to 4.3%. So I think that is definitely a cooling down when it comes to the labor market prospect. So combining all three, inflation, slowdown of the economy, and a higher unemployment rate in the labor market, I think that seems to present a stagflationary probability. So really depends on, again, how long this war is going to end, how much this AI related boom is going to continue, and also how fiscal and monetary policy are going to unfold. All of this would then shape the economic trajectory.
Yan Liang, professor of economics, was Willamette University, speaking with my colleague Zhao Yang. This is World Today. Stay tuned. You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. China's Innovent Biologics and the U.S. pharmaceutical giant Pfizer have agreed to a global licensing and a collaboration deal to develop 12 early-stage cancer medicines. The deal includes a $650 million upfront payment to the Chinese company and up to more than $9.8 billion in potential development, regulatory, and commercial milestone payments. The deal comes amid a broader boom in China's biotech licensing. According to data provider FarmCube, the value of such deals in the Greater China region rose by nearly tenfold from 2021 to a new high of more than $137 billion last year. So joining us now on the line is Professor Liu Baochen, Director of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Nihan.
So we understand the deal is structured across 3 tiers. 4 programs is going to be co-developed and co-commercialized. For another 4 programs, Pfizer will receive an exclusive licensing outside Greater China, and for the remaining 4 programs, Pfizer is going to hold an exclusive global licensing and bear all the global development costs. What is your reading of this arrangement? How will the 2 sides benefit from this deal respectively?
Well, this is a very sophisticated and balanced partnership involving more than $10 billion, which reflects the growing capacity of the Chinese bio industry and also the extensive globalization program for multinational companies in China in the pharmaceutical area. The 3-tier structure can allow the synergy of the 2 companies in order to match the different level of risk, investment, and strategic value. So for the first group, which is really the most promising asset, co-development and co-commercialization can enable Innovent to participate directly in early stage into the global value creation rather than simply licensing its innovation, which is a significant shift from the traditional deals in which Chinese biotech firms primarily serve as a research provider. For the second group of the program, Innovent retains its strategic position in the Chinese market while leveraging Pfizer's regulatory, clinical, and commercial network overseas. This allows the Chinese company to monetize its innovation while they are able to preserve the long-term growth opportunities at home. For the third group, Pfizer assumes full responsibility for the global development and commercialization because this particular industry is highly risky And so therefore, they are in the right position to bet into the future growth because right now, my understanding, the drug is still hanging in the first phase of development to deal with safety issues, to deal with the pharmacotics. So this is something that can relieve of the future risk of the Innovent. But for Pfizer, the benefits are equally compelling. The company can really gain access to a diversified portfolio of the new therapies without having to build entirely in-house. So this can really help them to replenish their future product pipelines.
So why do you think global drug makers are stepping up their search for experimental medicines developed here in China?
At first is Chinese capacity has accelerated over the past 1 decade in the biotech pharmaceuticals. They are no longer focusing on producing generic medicines or following the patents that are already off-shelf or through reverse engineering, but increasingly they are generating the first-in-class or best-in-class drug candidates that can compete on a global basis. The quality of the scientific research, clinical development, and more significantly, the talent pool in this industry has improved significantly. And the second consideration is that multinational pharmaceutical companies, they are also facing mounting pressures to replenish their product pipelines, what they term now as the patent cliff, which means when their patents are facing expiration, they need to really engage in more of the licensing for the innovative IPs from external sources. So this is their strategic choice. And now China has already become one of the world's most dynamic innovation for the biomedicine. So it's really the collective combination of the talents, the process, the industrial cluster, and also the low-cost type of research, and eventually the processing of such sort of medicine can be highly attractive to global companies. So this is really the major driver to move ahead with the Chinese cutting-edge type of competitiveness.
Lastly, and briefly, Professor, what do you think this deal we're talking about here tells us about the future China-U.S. ties in the biotech industry?
Well, I think the public health is really a global concern without any discrimination of the political regime, as a matter of fact, and also the innovation in this area is there to require a global endeavor. So this is there to send a signal that despite of the broader geopolitical tensions, biotechnology remains a strong and sustaining force for collaboration between China and the United States, in which they enjoy the comparative advantage on both sides. So therefore, developing new medicine really requires more of the global collaboration, not to mention a bilateral one or regional one, which requires also the capital input, clinical expertise, and regulatory synchronization. So in a way, the future of such a sort of relationship
we take your point, but thank you very much for joining us. Professor Liu Baochen joining us from the University of International Business and Economics. You're listening to World Today. Bye for now.